The woman's voice cracked like dry kindling. "Please don't take my baby." Jake Mercer's Colt .45 trembled in his grip. The barrel pointed somewhere between the woman's chest and the bundle she clutched against her body. The infant's cry pierced the desert air, thin, desperate, hungry. 3 days he'd been tracking the stolen horse. 3 days following hoofprints that led him to this crumbling adobe shelter, where he'd expected to find thieves, not a mother begging for her child's life. "Ma'am, his voice caught. The woman couldn't be more than 20, her dress torn and stained with travel dust. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her lips were split from sun and thirst. But it was the way she held that baby, like the whole world could burn as long as those tiny fingers stayed wrapped around hers, that made Jake's gun hand shake. She pressed herself deeper into the shelter's corner, bare feet scraping against the dirt floor. "I know what you're thinking, that I stole her, that I'm some kind of..." A sob escaped her throat. "But she's mine. I swear on my mother's grave, she's mine." Jake lowered the gun an inch. His bay mare stood tied outside, nickering softly in the evening heat. Somewhere in the distance, coyotes called to each other across the mesa. The stolen horse, a paint stallion worth more than most men made in a year, grazed peacefully beside the shelter, its reins dragging in the sand. But looking at this woman, at the desperation carved into every line of her face, Jake couldn't piece together how a horse thief had become a mother protecting her child. "Where's the baby's father?" His words came out harder than he intended. The woman flinched. "Dead." The word fell between them like a stone into still water. "Killed 3 weeks ago. They said it was an accident, but I know better. I know what they really wanted." Jake's finger moved away from the trigger. The woman's story had holes big enough to drive cattle through, but the baby's cry was real. The fear in her eyes was real. And somewhere in the mess of stolen horses and dead husbands, Jake felt the familiar tug of something he'd tried to bury years ago, the need to protect what couldn't protect itself. The sun was setting behind the mesa, painting the shelter walls blood red. Jake holstered his gun and took a step forward. That's when he heard the hoofbeats. Multiple riders moving fast, closing in from the east. Jake's hand flew back to his holster. "How many men are after you?" The woman's face went white as bone. 4, maybe 5. She clutched the baby tighter, and the child's wails grew louder. "They'll kill us both if they find us." The hoofbeats grew closer, maybe 200 yards out and closing fast. Jake's mind raced through his options. He could mount up right now, take the stolen horse, and ride away clean, collect the bounty, forget he'd ever seen a desperate mother and her crying child. It would be the smart play, the safe play, but the woman was looking at him like he was her last hope on earth. "They're not lawmen," she whispered, rocking the baby. "They're the ones who killed my husband, the ones who..." Her voice broke. "Please, I'll give you anything. The horse, what little money I have. Just don't let them take her." Jake cursed under his breath. Every instinct told him to run. He'd spent 10 years as a bounty hunter, precisely because it kept things simple. Track down what was stolen, return it to who owned it, collect the reward. No complications, no moral puzzles that kept a man awake at night. The hoofbeats were close enough now that he could hear the jingle of spurs, the creak of saddle leather. Through the shelter's cracked doorway, Jake caught sight of dust rising against the darkening sky. 4 riders, just like she'd said, spread out in a hunting formation. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. Sarah Coleman." She wiped tears from her cheek with the back of her hand. "The baby's name is Emma." Jake looked down at little Emma, red-faced and squalling, tiny fists waving in the air. 3 months old, maybe 4, innocent as fresh snow. Then he looked at Sarah, saw the bruises on her wrists that hadn't come from hard travel, saw the way she kept glancing at the door like death itself was riding toward them. The hoofbeats stopped. Voices carried across the desert air, rough, predatory. "She came this way. Tracks lead right to that old shelter. Better be careful, boys. That girl's got more fight in her than we gave her credit for." Cruel laughter echoed off the mesa walls. Jake made his choice. He pulled his rifle from its scabbard and checked the chamber. "Sarah," he said quietly, When I tell you to run, you take that baby and get behind those rocks. Don't look back." The voices outside grew closer. One of them called out, "Sarah Coleman, we know you're in there, darling. Time to come home. Asterisk. Now don't be shy, Sarah." The voice outside dripped with false sweetness. "We've come a long way to fetch you home." Jake pressed himself against the shelter wall, rifle ready. Through a crack in the adobe, he watched 4 men dismount. The leader wore a black hat with silver conchos, his face scarred from what looked like an old knife fight. The others spread out like wolves circling prey, one toward the back of the shelter, 2 flanking the sides. "She ain't alone," the scarred man said, studying the ground. "Fresh horse tracks. Someone's been helping our little runaway." Sarah's breathing came in short, panicked gasps. Emma had gone quiet, as if the baby sensed the danger pressing in around them. Jake caught Sarah's eye and nodded toward the back wall, where loose stones created a gap just wide enough for a desperate woman to squeeze through. "Sarah Coleman," the scarred man called again, closer now. "Your husband owed us money, a lot of money, a lot of money. Now that he's gone to meet his maker, that debt falls to you and your little girl." Jake's blood ran cold. This wasn't about the stolen horse. This was about something much worse. "We ain't unreasonable men," another voice chimed in. "The baby's got value. Pretty little thing like that will fetch a good price in Mexico. And you, well, there's always work for a young widow who knows her place." Sarah pressed her hand to her mouth to stifle a sob. Jake had heard enough. He stepped into the doorway, rifle raised. "The lady's not interested in your offer." 4 guns swung toward him instantly. The scarred man smiled, showing yellowed teeth. Well, well, got ourselves a hero, boys." He studied Jake with the casual interest of a man appraising livestock. "You picked the wrong woman to rescue, stranger. This ain't your fight. Made it my fight when you rode up here talking about selling babies." The scarred man's smile widened. "You know who I am, bounty hunter. Name's Caleb Morrison. Maybe you heard of me down in Tucson. Sheriff there paid good money for information about my whereabouts. Last I checked." Jake's heart sank. Morrison was wanted for robbery, murder, and worse things decent folks didn't speak about. The bounty on his head would set a man up for life, but that same bounty meant Morrison had nothing left to lose. "Here's what's going to happen," Morrison continued, his hand resting on his gun. "You're going to set down that rifle, mount up and ride away. Forget you ever saw us. In return, I'll let you keep breathing." Behind Jake, Sarah whispered urgently, "There's something else, something I haven't told you." Morrison's eyes narrowed. "Don't you go filling his head with stories, Sarah. Man might get ideas about being noble." He took a step closer. "What do you say, bounty hunter? Walk away rich or die poor trying to save a woman who's been lying to you from the start?" Jake felt the weight of Sarah's secret pressing against his back like a loaded gun. Whatever she hadn't told him, it was about to change everything. Asterisk. "The baby isn't just mine," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible over the men's voices outside. "She's Morrison's daughter." Jake's blood turned to ice water. He turned to stare at her, and Sarah's eyes filled with fresh tears. "My husband found out Morrison was forcing himself on the Mexican women who worked his ranch. When Thomas tried to stop him, she swallowed hard. Morrison killed him with his bare hands. Made me watch. Said if I ever told anyone he'd do worse things to Emma than he did to her father." Jake felt something break loose inside his chest. A door he'd kept locked for years swinging open. "You ran to protect her from her own father. He doesn't see her as his daughter. He sees her as..." Sarah couldn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Jake understood the kind of man Morrison was. Outside, Morrison's voice grew impatient. "Time's up, bounty hunter. What's it going to be?" Jake looked down at little Emma, sleeping now in her mother's arms. The baby had Morrison's dark hair but Sarah's gentle features, 3 months old and already carrying a burden no child should bear. He thought about his own sister Mary, barely 16 when the Comancheros took her. He'd tracked them for 2 years, found their camp, found her grave. "I had a sister once," he said quietly, surprising himself. "About your age when I lost her. Spent 10 years telling myself if I'd been faster, stronger, smarter. He met Sarah's eyes. Maybe I could have saved her. Sarah reached out and touched his hand. Her fingers were cold but steady. You can't save the dead, Jake, but you can save the living. Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding deeper than words. Jake had spent a decade running from the guilt of failing Mary. Here was his chance to succeed where he'd failed before. There's a cave about a mile north of here, he said, checking his rifle. Follow the creek bed. If something happens to me, stay hidden until dawn, then ride for Silver Creek. Tell Sheriff Martinez that Jake Mercer sent you. Sarah shook her head. I won't leave you to face them alone. You have to. Emma needs her mother more than I need backup. He paused, then added, when this is over, if I'm still breathing, I'll come find you. Morrison's wanted for more than just what he did to us, Sarah said. There's a Wells Fargo stage he robbed last month, killed the driver and a passenger. If you bring him in alive, I know. Jake had seen the wanted poster, $2,000, dead or alive. Morrison's voice boomed from outside. I'm done being patient, bounty hunter. Come out now, or we're coming in. Jake looked at Sarah one more time, memorizing her face. Then he stepped toward the door, knowing that in the next few minutes, either justice would be served, or Emma would grow up without anyone to protect her from the monsters of the world. The sun had disappeared behind the mesa, leaving only stars and the promise of violence hanging in the desert air. Jake stepped into the starlight with his hands raised, rifle held high above his head. Don't shoot, I'm coming out. Morrison's men relaxed slightly, but their leader kept his gun drawn. Smart man, now drop that rifle, and Jake dove left, rolled behind a boulder, and came up firing. His first shot took down the man flanking the shelter's east side. The second sent Morrison scrambling for cover behind his horse. Chaos erupted, muzzle flashes lighting up the desert like deadly lightning. But Jake wasn't trying to win a gunfight, he was buying time. The stolen paint horse, spooked by the gunfire, bolted straight through Morrison's men, scattering them like tumbleweeds. Jake used the confusion to put two more bullets down range, driving the survivors behind cover. In the distance he heard what he'd been waiting for, hoofbeats, lots of them coming fast from the south. That would be Sheriff Martinez and his posse. Jake called out, reloading. Seems someone saw smoke signals from the Navajo reservation. They've been tracking you for 2 days, Morrison. Morrison's curses turned the air blue. You son of a, drop your weapons. Martinez's voice boomed across the desert as a dozen riders surrounded the shelter. Torches blazed to life, turning night into day. This is the law. The fight went out of Morrison's remaining men instantly. They threw down their guns and raised their hands. But Morrison himself tried one last desperate play, spinning toward the shelter where he thought Sarah was hiding. Jake put a bullet through his shoulder, spinning him to the ground. That's for Thomas Coleman, and for every woman you hurt. Morrison lay groaning in the dirt as Martinez's men secured the scene. The sheriff himself dismounted and walked over to Jake, shaking his head in amazement. How'd you know we were coming? Jake smiled grimly. Didn't. But Morrison didn't know that. 3 months later, Jake found himself standing on the porch of a small house in Silver Creek, watching Sarah hang laundry on the line. Emma gurgled happily in a basket nearby, reaching for dust motes dancing in the morning sun. The $2,000 bounty on Morrison had bought Sarah the house and enough land for a fresh start. You could stay, you know, Sarah said without turning around. Emma needed a good man in her life. Jake touched the badge pinned to his vest. Deputy Marshal, Silver Creek Territory. I'm not going anywhere, he said quietly. Sarah turned and smiled, and for the first time in 10 years, Jake Mercer felt like he'd finally come home. In the distance, church bells rang across the valley, calling decent folks to Sunday service, while a gentle breeze carried the sound of a baby's laughter toward the endless blue sky.